This is about the future. It is the challenges that we are going to face in the future. Do we have a leader who knows how to build alliances, who knows how to build coalitions, who can bring the country together to tackle these tough challenges? President Trump has shown that he cannot do that. He can't do it domestically. He hasn't worked with the governors on everything from COVID to the wildfires, and he can't do it internationally. We've seen that both on COVID and on most of the major national security issues.
Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in the East. Donald Trump seems to think that the sole purpose of the Republican Party, and of the American presidency for that matter, is to serve him. But a growing number of prominent conservatives are standing up and saying they will no longer associate themselves with the party that exists to justify Trump's whims, his cruelty, his authoritarian impulses, and his embrace of conspiracy theories. One of them is that man, retired Admiral William McRaven, the man in charge of the raid that took out Osama bin Laden nearly a decade ago. He reveals in a brand new Wall Street Journal op-ed today that he recently voted for Joe Biden. And he writes this, quote, "Truth be told, I am a pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, small government, strong defense, and a national anthem standing conservative. But I also believe that Black Lives Matter, that the Dreamers deserve a path to citizenship, that diversity and inclusion are essential to our national success, that education is a great equalizer, that climate change is real, and that the First Amendment is the cornerstone of our democracy. Most important, I believe that America must lead in the world with courage, conviction, and a sense of honor and humility." Admiral McRaven is far from the only conservative trying to cast off the shackles of Trumpism. Our friend and the former Republican National Committee Chairman, Michael Steele, reveals in a new piece posted on NBC Think today that he too is voting for Joe Biden. He explains it this way, quote, "America has watched as the Republican Party stopped pursuing its animating principles of freedom and opportunity. It has given up its voice on things that mattered and instead bent the arc of the party towards the baser motives of one man who is neither a Republican nor a conservative." He said more about his decision during an appearance on Morning Joe today.
This isn't leadership. This is a failed moment, and the country needs to do better than this because the country can do better than this. And, you know, for all of my policy differences with Joe Biden, I told him, I said, look, I look forward to beating you up on some of this stuff you may want to put out there. Trust me. But I want to have that fight. I want to have that fight over, you know, healthcare and the environment and things like that. I don't want to have a fight over being an American. The person we put in that office, in the Oval Office, behind that resolute desk, is an extension of us. They reflect the good, the bad, the ups and downs of us. And at the end of the day, we come to rely on them to do the right thing.
It's such a wow moment, but Steele isn't even the first RNC chairman to announce his opposition to the party's current standard bearer. Former Montana Governor Mark Roscoe, who served as head of the party during George W. Bush's presidency, said last month he too is voting for Joe Biden this year. The growing number of prominent Republicans joining the Biden coalition is where we start this hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Robert Gibbs, former White House press secretary to President Obama, is here. Also joining us, founding member of the Lincoln Project, our friend Steve Schmidt, and Democratic strategist Aisha Mills is here. I have to start with you, Aisha. Do you want us?
Look, what we want is we want to reclaim our nation, and absolutely we want you to be sane people who get that Donald Trump is a threat and completely, the wrong direction. And frankly, sometimes I just think that the entire administration has lost its mind and is crazy. So yes, and by the way, Steve, kudos to the Lincoln Project. You guys are killing it on Twitter.
Steve Schmidt, I think your name has been invoked, but I want you to take on a couple of these things here. A winning coalition that includes two former chairmen of the Republican Party, as well as, I think Tim Alberto breaks some new ground in his reporting today, and he's been all over the Republican slide into the muck that is Trumpism. And I think he's been spot on in his articulations of what's happening in the race. He writes that essentially suburban women have been gone since 2018, and it's actually suburban men white college-educated men who are maybe having what we're seeing in the polls. The result of their departure is that look of sort of an enduring lead for Joe Biden, close to 10 points. Where do you think this race is, and how does the Republican piece of it fit into the coalition you're seeing behind Biden?
Well, Rasmussen talked about the fact that right now the lead that Joe Biden is enjoying is made up in large measure by Republicans. Steve Bannon talked about the fact that he called it the Bannon line, that if you had 4 or 5% of Republicans who would cross over and support Joe Biden, it would be impossible for Donald Trump to win. So by no means are disaffected Republicans the majority of Joe Biden's base, but are an important component of it. It's an American coalition. And I think the hangover of everybody's surprise from 2016 is that the size, the durability, the depth of Biden's coalition has just been constantly understated, generally speaking, in the media for this race, because no one wants to be wrong twice in an election with Donald Trump. But Biden has an outsized lead. It's as big a lead as there's been in the modern era of politics, certainly this century, at this point in the race. And so when you look at Donald Trump's comportment, you look at the rallies, you look at what's going on, you look at all the totality of the stories, this is a campaign that's in collapse. It's pulling down its TV buys, it's out of money, it's squandered $1 billion. I mean, Donald Trump's the first candidate in history to spend $1 billion and make a situation worse. But the entire campaign is built on a premise that he's done a good job for the last 4 years. And I think the American people have a really good, strong understanding of what a disaster we're in. And then we're in this disaster because of the incompetent who sits behind the Resolute desk.
There are two sides to this, though, Robert Gibbs. I mean, Joe Biden has run an incredibly disciplined campaign, and he's also managed to make what is a structural disadvantage, which is less attention from the press, a strategic and electoral advantage. And none of the 17 Republicans who ran against Trump in 2016 could figure out how to do that. Hillary Clinton did, of course, win the popular vote, but could not eke out an electoral victory 4 years ago, so didn't sort of thread that needle. But what I want to ask you is, Joe Biden has managed to move his party's ticket to the left of where it was 4 years ago on some big issues like climate change that are important not just to Democrats, but to younger voters, and keep racking in all these. I mean, the McRaven op-ed is just remarkable for what he lays bare. He is a Second Amendment loving, stand for the anthem believing, hardcore conservative who's voting for Joe Biden because the country basically has no honor under Donald Trump. But Joe Biden deserves as much credit for doing the right things as Trump deserves blame for running his campaign into the ground, doesn't he?
Absolutely. Look, I think everyone has to give credit to one singular thing about what Joe Biden has talked about. The first thing he talked about in this race was bringing this country together. And fundamentally, that's what underpins both of those op-eds. And look, we've all been involved in those announcement speeches. And sometimes you look back at them and you've got kind of some throwaway lines that you can say are threads that come throughout the whole campaign. But for Joe Biden, it's really been the central premise, right? And I would say, sure, he's moved the party to the left on important things like climate change. And it is important when you see somebody like Admiral McRaven talking about the fact that he doesn't deny that the climate is changing and therefore we have to change with it. So I think it's an important evolution in this campaign. And look, I think what also underpins a lot of this is just utter exhaustion at Donald Trump. I think that first debate laid bare what most people are protected by, right? Most people are smart enough. They don't have Twitter on their phones and they don't spend their days glued to it. And so they're removed from this rant that happens on a, every hour basis from the Oval Office. But what happened in that debate was 75 million people tuned in to watch Donald Trump read his Twitter feed. And now you weren't protected from the fact that you didn't have that app on your phone. Yeah. You were watching it in real time. Add to that the incompetence of what they've seen around the economy and COVID, and it's been disastrous for this president.
Steve, I want to ask you something. I'm going to put you on the spot because we've never had this conversation privately. But Mark Salter was on this show, and we were talking about it just reminded me of some of the themes that John McCain sought to hit in his campaign in '08 that you and I were a part of. It seems that obviously the policy platform is dramatically different. John McCain ran as a Republican standard bearer. Joe Biden's running as the Democrat standard bearer. But in terms of tone and putting the country over party, it seems that Joe Biden is running, no offense to any of us, a better version of the campaign John McCain might have wanted to run. And the reason I want your thoughts on that is because this coalition seems like a coalition that only a few figures on either side of the ideological spectrum could even hope to assemble.
Look, I think, Nicole, that at the end of the day, the stakes in this election are the highest that they've been in any American election since 1864. They're much higher than they were in 2008. In 2008, through the fall, the McCain campaign was beset by the reality that the Great Recession had begun on a Republican watch, and the right track numbers in the country just tanked. And it was clear from mid-September on that President Obama, that Senator Obama was going to win the election. I mean, but as bad as things were in the fall of 2008, there were not hundreds of thousands of dead Americans because of the incompetence of the American president. The most lethal lie in the history of the presidency, in the country's history, was the lie that Donald Trump told this country over February or March. And it has shattered American life. And so Joe Biden, right now is about to become president, I believe. But he's doing so in a landscape where the damage to the country, and not just in death and suffering and economic collapse, but to our spirit, to our soul, to our national character, it is so immense. And I think that Joe Biden has run a campaign that's appropriate for the moment. And I think he has the life skills, forged from his own tragedies, his own resiliency, to begin the work of healing up the wounds of this nation. But we're a hurting country. Make no mistake about it after 4 years. And we're hurting in a way that is unparalleled to any other moment in time in the modern history of the country.
Aisha, it does bring about this reality that I think any of us that work on campaigns have to contend with. At the end of the day, you can have the best data analytics, you can write the best speeches, but people vote on a gut feeling. And I think what Steve's saying bears out. In our guts, we're scared. And it's leading people to do things they've never done before. Two former chairmen of the Republican National Committee to not just vote for Joe Biden privately, but to write about it and try to bring people with them. At least 4 members of the Trump administration, Anthony Scaramucci, Elizabeth Newman, Miles Taylor, Olivia Troy, not just leaving for cause, but joining a PAC, a super PAC, to try to communicate what a danger Donald Trump is on issues of domestic terrorism, coronavirus response. And Anthony Scaramucci's indictments tend to be more personal about character flaws. But I want to read you, it's also forcing newspapers and news outlets to break with tradition. And today, USA Today broke 38 years of tradition and endorsed Joe Biden. I'm going to read a little bit of it. This year, the editorial board unanimously supports the election of Joe Biden, who offers a shaken nation a harbor of calm and competence. If this were a choice between 2 capable major party nominees who happen to have opposing ideas, we would not choose sides. Different voters have different concerns, but this is not a normal election, and these are not normal times. This year, character, competence, and credibility are on the ballot. Given Trump's refusal to guarantee a peaceful transfer of power if he loses, so too is the future of America's democracy. Aisha.
Yeah. I want to go back, kind of sum that up and go back to something that's been said about who gets the credit for this. Surely we are going to elect Joe Biden in November to get rid of this monster that's in the White House. But let's recognize that the power, this is really power to the people. Joe Biden is being powered by movements that rose up in the wake of Donald Trump, starting with the Women's March that happened just as he was being inaugurated. And then certainly before that, the Black Lives Matter movement movement that said we are going to no longer tolerate all these bodies in the street. Even we can go back further and look at even Occupy Wall Street, for example. It's been Elizabeth Warren, it's been Bernie Sanders as leaders that have also really ignited movements, but it's been the people on the ground, our Republican friends included, who have seen this country slip away from the dignity and respect that we want to portray in the world, that have allowed some of our darkest angels to kind of come back up into the mainstream, that have said, no, we're not going to do this anymore. And if there's anything that we should take away from this cycle, is that in years past, we often have just wanted it to be about one singular figurehead. The president is just, the person who's driving the train. But this is such a powerful moment because people from all walks of life who care about a variety of different issues, be it immigration reform or criminal justice or dignity or, our reputation around the world, environment, et cetera, they are rallying right now to participate because the politics are personal and certainly the consequences are real and being felt in people's lives. And I think that is who we need to kind of keep our eye on the prize. And frankly, if we have that tone and tenor of inclusivity, of recognizing that people are in fact participating in a way that is driving the change that we want to see, then we can continue to get more people engaged and involved. So I just want to put that plug out there to remind us to pat ourselves on the back for engaging and participating, because it is going to be all of the people that change this country come November.
Well, and Robert Gibbs, let's put an even finer point on it. Aisha's absolutely right. And it was Black voters in South Carolina that had the most to say and the most to do with Joe Biden becoming the Democratic Party's standard bearer. And then on Super Tuesday, when he started winning big victories in states he hadn't campaigned to once and hadn't run an ad in ever because he didn't have any money, it was, just as she was saying, a coalition of grassroots support and a groundswell that started in South Carolina and really swept from coast to coast.
Absolutely. Look, I think going into South Carolina, even as much trouble as Joe Biden had, he was one of really only two candidates that had shown any sort of ability to put together a multiracial coalition, right? And that happened in a big way in South Carolina. It propelled him well past that. And again, I just give a lot of credit to the campaign and to the candidate for having that sort of message discipline, but also having that, not just the message discipline that we talk about as practitioners, but the theory of the case of what it is going to take to win this White House is really, that's the hardest thing I think to pull through, right? That's the thing that's not as easy. You have campaigns that will switch slogans like the soup of the day, and that doesn't really work. You've got to have something that's a real theory of the case, that's really at the core and the gut of who that candidate is and is passionate about talking about every day. And I think that's why Joe Biden has been successful. This idea of unification, this idea of a president, not just for a party, but for a country. And I think those are all powerful ideas that he's brought to the fore.
No, it's a great point. He said he was running to save the soul of the country, and then Donald Trump did everything he could to stick a spear through the soul of the country. So, all right, as a punishment for being brilliant, Robert, Steve, and Aisha are all sticking around. When we come back, long lines of early voting, this time in the key battleground state of Wisconsin. The early voting numbers are staggering across this country. We'll get new data from our friend Steve Kornacki at the big board about who's voting early and how it is already shaping the contours of this election. And later, Donald Trump says we're rounding the corner on coronavirus, if only. Cases are actually soaring in nearly every state. Our colleague, Dr. Kavita Patel, will join us. She says tracking the spread of Donald Trump's disinformation about coronavirus is nearly as challenging as tracking the virus itself. Deadline White House returns after a quick break, so don't go anywhere.